This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
All right, welcome to our Talk Business and Politics KATV Midweek Political Roundtable. That's a mouthful right there. I'm Roby Brock, glad to have you with us. Let me introduce today's panel. We got Robert McLarty from the Markham Group. We've got KATV's lead Capitol reporter Janelle Lilley, and we've got David Ray with Americans for Prosperity. You have a Democratic background, you have a Republican background. I guess you're a libertarian now. Is that what we describe you?
We advocate for economic freedom and individual liberty.
Who do you advocate for, Robert?
I advocate for good government.
So do all of us. All right, well, welcome. All right, the format for today is always easy to kind of roll with. So everybody brings a question to the table. Everybody answers everybody else's questions, even your own if you want to. Janelle, I will stick with my ladies first policy and let you go first.
All right, so we're hoping there's only a couple more weeks left in the session for those of us who are there all the time. It's a fingers crossed thing right now. But there's still a ton of bills that have yet to even pass through a committee. So of all of those that haven't really made much progress or have made just a little bit of progress, what do you think is the most important one that's still on the table that we are going to address, just haven't even started yet?
Who wants to take it first? David?
Well, look, I mean, different things are important to different people. I mean, one of the bills that I think is important to taxpayers is Nate Bell's bill that deals with special elections, moving special elections to a consistent May date or a consistent November date. I think that's important because it'll protect taxpayers from tax increases that special interests and local entities try and pass all the time. I think it'll also increase voter participation, which, you know, a lot of times these special elections have a paltry 2 or 3% turnout. And look, there's a lot of opposition to that idea. I know that. I think it's fairly common sense, but there's a lot of people that stand to benefit from, you know, putting tax increases on the ballot. And so I would like to see that bill make more progress.
Special election, but it got beat up in committee today, didn't it? Didn't get out. I think it didn't. Yeah, it came for a run. They're your favorite kind of bills, though.
Yeah, I've worked on a lot of those, and you know that's kind of in my mind. This session has developed and created a lot of bills and legislation that's taken away the rights of a lot of cities and counties to move forward, and both with schools and special elections and referendums. So I mean, that to me has been one of the bigger surprises, is how we've now moved away from, you know, lessening government to expanding it. But I think, I don't know if I'd consider it the most important, but I think in my mind one of the bigger surprises that's been talked about in 2 sessions is tort reform. It seemed everybody was lining up to kind of move something forward there, and then it just kind of disappeared. So that, to me, is kind of one of the bigger, like, what happened, you know, moments. But no, I think it's been kind of interesting to see kind of a conservative body move into creating more laws in the state government, which is kind of interesting.
It's a surprise to several people. All right, I will say, Janelle, that the bill that I am probably most interested in, there is some workforce education money that's out there. That bill has not really taken off yet. Governor Hutchinson held a press conference earlier this week to try to get that train rolling a little bit more. So that one's a big one to creating jobs in the state of Arkansas. It's multi-million-dollars worth of investment in jobs training. That one really hasn't moved yet. So
I'm waiting for CFCO. That was a shell bill that's filed, and it's kind of being filled in right now. I'm waiting for that to, you know, we had the rally at the Capitol already this year. I know it's Representative Miller's bill, and there has been some talk of, you know, does this fit under the Medicaid task force? Does this have its own piece of legislation that needs to be pushed through? And it's in committee, hasn't moved yet, but I'm waiting for some progress on that one.
That's a good one too. All right, David, you want to take the next question?
Sure. I guess my question is, what ends up happening with general improvement funds? You know, early in the session, Governor Hutchinson said that there was not going to be any room for that in the budget because of greater overall priorities, but you've got some legislators who are openly clamoring for GIF funds. You know, in our view at AFP, those are basically Arkansas's version of earmarks on, you know, local pet projects. I mean, so but what ends up happening, do you guys think?
Well, Benton needs a fireworks show, I think, right?
Well, they're going to have to increase their ticket sales if they don't, I guess, to afford it. No, I think it's a good card the governor's holding on to. I think eventually, you know, they're going to release some of those funds. A lot of upset FAA folks and fair officials and you know, volunteer firemen, you know, who depend on that money will be upset. I think the governor's going to work on his bigger budget issues and use that as kind of a card to go after these local guys to vote with them.
Yeah, I think what they're waiting on is pre-K funding. They're waiting to see how much money they have left before
capital gains tax.
Capital gains tax. Yeah, there's several things that are still kind of in the works where they can't even go to the governor really and beg for the money yet because they're not sure how much remains. And so I think once those get settled, then there's going to be the open hand policy at the governor's door.
It's part of the Revenue Stabilization Act. I mean, you got to get all of that in place first, your A, B, and C priorities, and then if there is money left over, that's where the general improvement funds are supposed to work their way into that budget process. I tend to think with Robert that it is a kind of a playing card that Governor Hutchinson has to still try to negotiate parts of that budget and the RSA. They've had as much as $1 million before to play with for general improvement funds, this, pork barrel stuff that you're talking about. Maybe it's only 50,000 this time, or maybe it's even less than that. But I think that something still materializes because there's too many of them that want it. I don't know if there's enough public pressure to back off at this point.
They're going to go. There's going to be money in there.
Well, I mean, look, I think there's more members at this point who are opposed to it than we've probably had in recent memory. People who campaigned as fiscal conservatives and who I think aren't going to have much of an appetite for that. But like you said, there's a lot of people who
they'll be like, hey, you don't want your share, I'll take it from you.
Exactly.
You need more than 25% to hold up those appropriations, so that's where it's got to come from. All right, Robert, I'll give you the third question.
Yeah, I mean, in reading the news, as we all have in the last couple of weeks with Senator Cotton's move on the Iran letter, and of course then a new law here allowing him to run for federal office at the same time seeking a presidential run.
Senator Bozeman could do it too.
Well, that's true in 2020. No, I was just kind of with David thinking what's Senator Cotton's next move nationally and kind of where you see this going for him within his own party ranks. I think it's kind of interesting.
I mean, does he really need to make a move really at this point, or can he just continue what he's doing and allow his name to be on different short lists for whatever in the future? But certainly, I don't know that he needs to be making a move right now. I feel like he might just continue on the same path that he's doing as a senator, and other people might be planning out his future for him. But as long as there aren't any faux pas, and as long as he can kind of keep that name recognition as high as it is right now, I mean, what does he really need to do at this point? I mean, people are talking about him on short lists for different things, but at this point, how much influence he has over that is just basically, how he continues to govern as a senator.
You know anything about how Tom Cotton thinks?
Yeah.
Inside.
Well, I would suspect that Tom's next move is probably getting ready to become a father here in just a couple of weeks, actually. So, he'll be excited about that, I'm sure. But, if you watched his maiden floor speech on the Senate earlier this week, I don't think it's rocket science to figure out that he has quickly moved to establish himself as a preeminent voice on issues of national security and foreign policy. And look, going into as all the new senators were inducted, Joni Ernst was getting all of the attention as kind of the biggest star in the freshman class. I think there's no doubt that Tom Cotton has kind of taken that mantle. You've seen him weigh in on the issue of Guantanamo Bay and using that as a tool to combat terrorism. You've seen him weigh in on the Iran nuclear deal, obviously, that's gotten so much attention. And AFP doesn't have a position on these foreign policy issues, but I would look for Tom to play a big role in these budget debates as they move forward. He'll be a strong voice for wanting to make sure that the military is adequately funded, and also for pursuing, meaningful reforms on the mandatory spending side of the budget, which is what a big part of that U.S. Senate race was fought over.
I was just going to interject that he told me one time that his interest is to be kind of an opinion leader when it comes to the budget on the Senate side, and I think that what you're seeing now as far as foreign policy, that's a natural fit for him just with his history, and so. I think that I will be anxious to see how he uses the stardom that he got with the foreign policy press and to transition to the things that he has said, at least on the record, that he really is interested in, really moving from over in the Senate.
Well, judging by the hits on our website in the past week to 10 days, I think there's not going to be anybody that's going to fall asleep at the wheel as to what he does next. I see him actually when he decides what he wants to do on the next issue, whether it's budget or another foreign policy debate, I would see him leaking out a little bit in advance just to make sure that we're all paying attention, because he does seem to generate a lot of buzz when he speaks. The other thing that has been amazing to me too in this whole debate on Tom Cotton is just still how polarizing he can be. I mean, he elicits fangs from the Democrats, and I mean, they want to make him the second coming in the conservative and Republican circles. He really there's just still very little middle ground about him in terms of how people feel.
Well, he got 57% of the vote, so I wouldn't say he's that polarizing. But I would say that to that point, Tom didn't run for the U.S. Senate to be a backbencher.
Yeah.
He ran to be a leader, and I think that's a message that he communicated, throughout the campaign, and he's followed through on that promise.
He's good for fundraising for Democrats, though, isn't he?
He can help raise a little bit of money, nationally especially, yeah.
All right, I'll go last question here, and I'm going to come back to the state legislature. Obviously, in November, the term limits law changed, extended to 16 full years, which will allow some term-limited House and a couple of Senate members, if they want to in 2016, to run for a fourth term or potentially a third term if you're in the Senate. So how does the change in the term limits law kind of impact the dynamics at the state capitol for some of these legislators out there? Do we see a mass exodus still? Do we see a mass, whatever the opposite of an exodus be, remaining there? Or do we see a little bit of a mixed bag?
I think it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag. I think you're going to have people who probably promised their spouses three and out, that are going to be begrudgingly, maybe a little bit, having to say goodbye to their House district in particular. But I also think that there are several rumors I've heard about others who are going to run. I mean, they're gonna, why not, especially with the idea of seniority and leadership, and it's almost like you don't want the brain drain, if you will. And so if you can stick around a little bit longer and influence the huge influx of freshmen that we've gotten in, and continue to pass bills that, as long as you're effective, I think a lot of them are going to try to stay.
Robert?
Yeah, I agree. I think the leadership is an interesting thing, because a lot of these guys that were third termers, even, maybe they didn't have the leverage. They were going to be gone the next session, so they weren't able to get through that key thing they were working on, or that bill they wanted to file because they couldn't get it through a committee. But now, when they're coming back, there's some leverage there that they can put on their seatmates. And I agree, it's going to create a lot of interesting couple discussions between the spouses back home. Well, honey, or
it's not my fault. The voters changed the law.
I mean, we have an opportunity to keep serving, so it'll be.
What do you think?
Well, I think Janelle's right in part that there will be some people who, either for personal or professional reasons, decide that they're going to stick with what they had thought was going to be the case all along. I think that we'll probably see more primaries, honestly, as there's less natural turnover via term limits. There were a lot of folks who were upset by the fact that this amendment changed term limits, and so I think that there could be an effort to roll that back. From my perspective, the ultimate term limits are elections, and we've still got elections, and every election is an example, or is an opportunity rather, to hold elected officials accountable for the promises that they made during the campaign and the votes that they cast once they got elected. So that's what we're focused on.
Here's my two observations on that topic there. Number one, could we have Speaker Gillum run for a second term? He's in his third term, but he could stay and run for again. We haven't had a two-term Speaker of the House since Bobby Hogue many years ago. That could be some additional power and influence for a House leader that we haven't seen in quite some time. And the other is, I've been told when I've talked to some sources up at the Capitol about what's really kind of going on, if you watch who's throwing the grenades in terms of their bills out there, they're done. They're not coming back. The ones that are playing it a little more passively or trying to be a little bit more diplomatic may be setting themselves up to run. So that may give you some indicator on some of that.
Well, and you
stuff.
know, there's no invisible primary for the next speaker right now. There's no discussion.
There is not.
So that kind of goes to your
This time in the
point.
session, you are always
it's
hearing
true.
rumors
I
of
hadn't
thought about
names for
that
the
yet.
Speaker of the
That's
House.
true.
There's nothing out there right now.
Would have been a good question for an enterprising reporter to have asked him at the political animals breakfast.
He
this
did,
week.
and he said that all of those decisions should be attended to after the legislative session's over.
Okay.
So
Very
there's
Fair
another
enough.
clue for you. All right. David Ray, Janelle Lilley, Robert McLarty, thank y'all so much for participating. Lots of fun.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
All right. You can keep up with the latest political headlines at KATV.com or talkbusiness.net. I'm Roby Brock. Thanks for watching.